1, we're going to talk about the transition of the ages and what this means and what the opportunities are. We're going to be talking about the nature of the outer planets as we speak, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. We'll be talking about this from a collective and an individual point of view, where these things happen to occur in your chart. We'll be talking about the transits of the north and south nodes, and how this relates to your personal situation as well as the collective situation. For example, now the nodes are getting ready to shift into Taurus and Scorpio, and we'll be talking about this. And also how to locate the current planetary rulers of the transits of the north and south nodes, and what this means collectively and individually. So that will constitute the bulk of this morning's lecture. As in anything that I do, again, when you have a question, please ask me at the moment you have a question. Very important. Any questions? No. So, the very first thing we want to consider is the transition of ages. Now, the first thing to try to embrace is that when the ages go in transition, there is a tremendous opportunity to stop the cycle of history from repeating themselves. This is the opportunity. Unfortunately, throughout human epochs and history, the cycle of history has not stopped repeating. So the question becomes, why? Why? And the reason is that roughly 70% of any collective mass, meaning in any country or society, the individuals cannot separate themselves from the times that they live in. There's an inability to, in quotes, step outside time. Because 70% of most collective masses are defined by the times that they live in. They cannot separate. And a simple, horrible example of this, imagine from the point of view of 1945, relative to the horror of the concentration camp, and the slogan then, "This will never happen again." And yet, just now, 50 years later, what do we see? The neo-Nazism. And now we have this very freaky fellow in Russia, this neo-Hitler vision. And this is an example of my point, not being able to separate from the times that we live, which then more or less dictates history repeating. It's a sad comment, yeah? But the opportunity is for the cycle of history to stop repeating. Now, when ages go into transition like this, and keeping in mind it is an evolutionary phenomenon. It's not one day that says, oh, now we're just acquiring age. This is insane for you to think of. Everything in life on time-space reality is a process. So it's transitional. And when you have the transition of ages, it creates its own unique set of problems, because all the archetypes that have defined the age that comes to closure comes to a head in space. It's like an acceleration of the last 2,000 years in a concentrated period of time. And it must come to a head in order for the collective to be aware that a change can be made. A simple example at this point, child abuse has gone on for obviously more than this decade. going on a long time. But nowadays, and it's always been in the famous closet, yeah? The family secret. And nowadays you can turn on any TV set and watch the next panelist show, and we see yet another set of people talking about their sexual abuse as children. This is intentional from a cosmic point of view, because this generates collective awareness. And when you have collective awareness, you then obviously have the opportunity of making change. See my point? That illustrates everything coming to a head. Now, yesterday we briefly mentioned that one of the primary archetypes of the Piscean age, primary, is that spiritual growth is dependent on suffering. We mentioned that we clearly have this whole issue of dominance and submission relative to religious teaching. Inferiority, superiority. Masochism, sadism. Now an example of these spiritual dimensions is also translated into human activity in a variety of ways. And an example of this archetype is the delusory thought in the human species, particularly embodied in the white form, that somehow we can dominate and or are superior to nature and the laws of nature. The consequence of this sort of pathology is the destruction of the atmosphere, the incredible contamination of your food sources, contamination of your water supply, the increasing, how do you say in English, desert, where you've got more and more desert happening. Erosion thing. The tremendous alteration in the weather patterns and the destructive events we've all been seeing on TV sets. This is direct karmic consequence of such a pathology. You see it in economic reality, in terms of classes, rich, poor. This is a form of dominance, submission, inferiority, superiority. Within this age, we have the philosophy defined by Nietzsche, the root of which is Zarathustra, or the superhuman, in which the masses are meant to be subservient. That's my point. The bottom line is that if you take these primary archetypes, you can see them applied in reality, with every form of reality. Economic, religious, political, family life. It's the point. It's obvious at this time, yes?
How does that bring in the environment?
What's this?
How does it bring in the environment? We were just talking about destruction in the atmosphere, erosion, weather. I just missed how the Piscean age and suffering and growth has a direct karmic consequence which would bring on the destruction. How does that correlate? That's all I'm
Because within those archetypes is the assumption, the teaching, that man is superior to all, and superior to the laws of nature. It's again the difference between man-made law and natural law. Those are two different worlds. Yes.
Is there another archetype that has to do with equating ownership with personal value? You know, whoever dies with the most toys wins.
Exactly. Same deal. That's the very basis. I mean, there is an instinct in the human species to compete. Yes, I mean, that's natural. But it's how we compete that become the issues. And when it's overlaid, this natural instinct is overlaid by such a conditioning, then equals your... So all these things are trying to come to a head. And if we just step back and take an objective look at the nature of our world as we speak. I mean, what are you seeing nowadays when you turn on the news? Just, well, beyond violence, you are seeing incredible polarization. It seems to me that almost every form of reality is in some state of polarization now. Yeah.
It seems like there's the premise and archetype that one must get their power from others. They
That
don't.
is part of the archetype because we have been conditioned to believe that our ultimate authority is outside of ourselves. That God somehow is outside of ourselves. And this is an example of all this stuff that is called channeling. And it's no different. I mean, history repeats. In the time of Jesus, when Neptune was transiting Capricorn, at that point in time, there was a collective need, Neptune, for the expected Messiah, Neptune, relative to relieving the oppression, Capricorn, of the Romans relative to the Jews. And the collective expectation brought forth what was then called all the false prophets, because the collective need was dictating it. In such a way that when Jesus manifests, he is then judged, Capricorn, against the prevailing backdrop. And that is put on the pole that we call the cross. And very few people care to remember that Jesus in his own time was a small figure. In fact, the Jewish people were given an option in terms of him living and Barabbas living. And they chose Barabbas. The Roman guy that had him put on the pole could barely even remember the guy's name. Just another one amongst many. So nowadays, when you have the parallel is when you have the collapse of the American dream, and more people within the normal classes of people, middle class, low class, material lifestyle, and all this dream Neptune begins to break down. Capricorn. It creates exactly the same collective need. And the question primarily in this time is, there must be more than this. And when you have that collective thought form, this now gives rise to all the current false prophets, as in clowns like Rajneesh. Or I don't mean to be stepping on anybody's spiritual toes here, I'm just speaking for myself, I guess. The clowns like Rajneesh. Check it out, man. The guy had 5 planets in Capricorn. And his downfall began with the first Neptune transit. People like the clever prophets of this world, the Reverend Moons of this world, who claim to be the reincarnation of Christ, or the Ramthas of this world. I mean, this woman channeled back in the 80s, people don't want to remember anymore. Reagan was our savior. Channeled message. Channeled message. Give me all your resources so I can raise my Arabian horses. Now, does this sound like spiritual enlightenment? But clearly the Waco fiasco. You know, and my point is this kind of deal is happening everywhere because we have been conditioned to think our authority's outside. All these people who are channeling, all it really means is because we have the Uranian transit also through Capricorn, as we said yesterday, all of our brains have been expanding in their own ways. And the threshold of what we used to call the conscious unconscious is receding. All of us in our own ways are beginning to access our own individuated unconscious. We're beginning to have our own information. And yet because of the stupid conditioning pattern, to have any Capricorn authority or legitimacy, somehow it's got to be linked with some other name other than one's own. It's a function of the conditioning pattern. If this channeling business was truly as it is, or true, it would be universal. As a matter of fact, if you go to the third world nations or the Far East, none of this stuff is happening. It's specific to Western world. That should tell you something. I'm not trying to say that the phenomenon of channeling does not exist. It just does not exist at the volume that is currently presented. As a matter of fact, true channelers tend to really die young. An example of true channeling is, what's his name, Jane Roberts.
Yes,
As it turns out, she dies of throat cancer. And the reason is because you've got 10,000 watts coming through a 5-watt bulb. What's going to happen? The thing's going to blow at some point, yeah? So it's just these sorts of things that are trying to come to a head. And now we move ever so methodically towards the Aquarian age.
Jeffrey, may I ask a question?
Sure.
What I hear is that the need people have for authority outside themselves, that need is created the aberrant leadership upon which this consciousness work is focused. And it recalls to me the clients I've had who sat there and they've lost everything they've owned to a religious movement and want to start over, and yet they're looking to the astrologer as the next leader for them in their empty lives.
Right.
Would you comment on that? Because I think that would help some.
It's just an extension of the same archetype, yes? And it's again a transference from this authority to this authority. And it's exactly the point of the Aquarian age that's coming, because the essence of the Aquarian archetype is to liberate. To liberate from what? All existing conditioning. All. And this creates its own dilemma, because when you move into a brand new age, the new age wants to evolve new paradigms that have yet to be evolved. So the typical problem, as Noel was pointing out, is that we may become Neptune disillusioned with this guru or this teacher or this authority or this thought form or belief system or value associated. And the typical reaction to the disillusionment, okay, throw this one aside, but now I'm going to align myself with another one that is part of the very age that's coming to closure. And my point is that all of it comes to closure. So it's not enough to just say, well, I'm done with this one, I'm going to take this one. In the last analysis, the New Age / Aquarius age demands radically new, that which is unformed. You see my point? Mm-hmm. So then this creates its own psychological problem. How many people are prepared to allow their consciousness to literally become a blank slate? To cast something completely away? And to resist the temptation to replace it with something from the existing age? How many of you, in all honesty, sitting in this room, feel you could be prepared for such a thing? It's what a Buddhist would call diamond nature. Questions? Yeah.
I have felt, and I'm sure many of us have felt professionally, that this is our mission in astrology, and we touched on this yesterday. And I get clients that come call me on the phone and say, what kind of astrology do you do? And when I mention the word spiritually evolving, sometimes I hear click, and other times it's right there. And when I point it out, show them their blueprint on how they're going to clean the slate. Then some of them will walk out, and then there will be a few remaining that say, okay, show me how to do this, because it ain't working no more. So this is what I feel my direct mission is to help people clean the slate, and I'm doing my own too.
Good for you.
So I think that's astrology's prime mission in the Aquarian age.
Yes. I saw another hand waving. No? So the point is that most human beings, because of the basic instinct in all of us to need to feel together, most of us cannot embrace that which is unformed. That is the archetype of chaos. That is the archetype of involution. And let's understand, for something to evolve, it must involute first. To be in a state of involution is to be in a state of chaos. It's to be in a state of absolute insecurity. It's to be in a psychological state with no existing guideposts to draw upon to negotiate into the future. And this is why most people freak the fuck out. And they want to re-secure the past. At least I know this. It may not work. You see my point? So the Aquarian age, it's like I tried to suggest yesterday. For all these eons, we have been defined through the law of three. Past, present, future. Try to understand that the past can only be known, the future can only be known from the point of view of the past. We can know the future because we've had a past. We have remembrance of the past. Yes? But in reality, the future is an abstract. So all of us tend to project our past into the future in order to have a semblance of psychological, emotional security, which is exactly why we recreate our past into the future. And that's why so many people have this horrible sense of just going in a famous circle. And it's why for eons the whole thing about how do you get off the wheel. Yes? Now you see where the wheel comes from. But to get off that wheel means what? To completely free yourself. And these are the sorts of reasons why the keeps repeating. Now we are going to be evolving, like it or not, from the law of three to the law of four, which is a simultaneous awareness of the past, present, and future existing simultaneously. The human consciousness or brain within the next 2,000 years will become holographic in its perception. This is a tremendous expansion relative to the existing brain. You can see the proof of my words because now they can design these things with the mind like in computer and so on. This is just a forerunner of what is going to be occurring within each human brain. Now imagine a state, a point in time, probably about 1,500 years from now, in which most human brains are holographic. Imagine this. Just take a moment to imagine what kind of reality this would be. Right now you have to do that, so you have to imagine. You won't need Walkmans, no. Can you imagine the implications of what we call reality? Can somebody describe her holographic reality?
Seeing things from all sides at once,
Yes.
Being able to communicate telepathically.
Yes.
synthesizing it all at once,
Yes.
everything.
That would mean we would be owning the whole of ourselves, and it would also be
Yes.
ending the polarity dance,
Right.
which is what,
Yes, exactly the point. It means that the very fabric of time will be perceived differently. Instead of having a linear perception, you'll have a holistic perception. And every waking and unwaking second of your existence.
How about the very better than matter? How about the very better than matter?
Exactly this morning. All of this is true. And my point is that this is where the current age evolution is taking the human species. And the stage is now set. We're on the stage. It is starting now with the incredible mutation of the genetic structure of life itself that we sort of spoke about yesterday. So in many ways, the human species at this point are guinea pigs. Experiments. The impeccable pig, yeah. What a name. So.
I'm sorry.
What's this? This can be understood again from the point of view of the philosopher. Fast.
Jeffrey, if we spend the first 1,000 years in the Aquarian age acting out the archetype of Leo, isn't that?
No, no, because now we're in the Virgo sub-age of the Piscean age, which is now both coming to common age.
Okay. But the first 1,000 years of the Aquarian age wouldn't be under the influence of the Leo.
Purifying. And then the Leo sub-age kicks in. Now imagine what that actually means. Actualizing into reality what has been evolving. The evolution now turning into evolution. Yeah.
Elaborating on the genetic mutation, what you were saying yesterday, in our perception of cancer and AIDS and leukemia and all these diseases that are destroying man are necessary, and it's only our pathological perception that we're bad.
Yes, because the way I like to explain this point is, imagine now that you're outside of the Earth, maybe in spacecraft or whatever, and you're simply looking at the Earth as if you're looking through a microscope. If I look into the human body and I find cancer cells in a microscope, what is the body naturally going to do relative to cancer cells? Is it not going to try and isolate them for the defense of the mechanism? Similarly, if I look at a ball, a thing called Earth, and I now observe the cells we call human species, I think it would be clear that it would be analogous to the cancer cell in the body. And relative to Gaia, the nature is trying to always sustain its balance relative to interrelational. Gaia is isolating human species. And we call these things AIDS and the rest of it. This is just a Gaia trying to cull that which is contaminating to its overall integrity.
So basically you're saying that it's Earth's way of, fighting back that everything we're doing is killing.
Yeah.
Purging itself with cancer, which is us.
Yes, I tend to think the Earth has its own immune system.
Right. Yeah.
Is that why people are being drawn to particular places on the continent that's going to be undergoing some earth changes?
I'm sorry.
To be destroyed, in other words, are they being drawn to places on the continent, i.e. California, if there's going to be some earth changes that might change it very quickly, or the reality system?
Sure. And all this operating relatively unconsciously. So, again, the essence, well,
According to Marlo Morgan's book, the gal who spent, 4 months with the Aborigines in Australia, they already have already always been able to find that any kind of communication they do. They live on the earth, and her message that she was on back with say they live off the earth, they really carry nothing to each other. They do not harvest, they do not hunt. Is that they are, their resolve to no longer reproduce themselves because of what we're doing to the atmosphere.
Well, the point you're really making is that most Aboriginal peoples are still defined by natural law.
And they live with it.
And they are in harmony. Primary brain. That's right. Virgilio.
You mentioned about the transition of the age, and
Please, hello.
you mentioned about the transition of the age, Pisces, and we're in the Virgo subphase. How do you determine or define those different subphases?
I'm sorry.
How do you determine the subphases if this is the Virgo
This
subphase?
starts at the half, some at the beginning of the age.
At the beginning, at the half?
The half some.
Explain that again.
If you've got, say, an age which is roughly 2,000 years,
Mhm.
the sub-age begins at the midpoint.
Okay.
So the key point is that Uranus, Taurus, is the archetype of liberation from all existing conditioning patterns. All. Now we're going to find this happening in all of our own individual lives. As an example, there's going to be a Uranian transit occurring in your chart. And it currently stated it's now with Neptune and yes, in Capricorn. Uranus is the archetype of liberation. So where do you find this transit exactly occurring in your chart? What existing conditioning reflected in the movement of the transit is your personal soul trying to embrace right now? What is it trying to be free of? What is it trying to evolve towards? Within liberation, Uranus, because this also correlates in Jungian terms to what's called the individuated unconscious, or in Jungian terms, Freudian terms, to the subconscious. Now, the individuated unconscious simply means content that is unique to yourself, which is different than the collective unconscious, of which there's three types, by the way. Now, in your individuated unconscious, as an example, Uranus has always been considered a higher octave of Mercury. Why? Mercury is going to correlate with your short-term memory, whereas Uranus is your long-term memory, which gets stored over time into your unconscious. An example, how many of you can remember in total detail what you did 5 days ago? Where are the memories? You know you did something 5 days ago every minute that you were alive. What were the memories? And you can't even remember in detail 5 days ago, so then you wonder why you can't remember past life. Think of it. So Uranus then is the depository of memories in total detail of this and every other life that you've ever lived. Now this is very important to embrace, because this is the component of consciousness that the hypnotherapist will access. There's a component in consciousness of those who meditate will access. relative to spontaneous past life memory. So the point is that if we agree with past life has, guess what? Identities, values, beliefs, memories, just like this one. So the question becomes, how is it possible for the storehouse of memory, spanning many, many, many lives, to also serve as subconscious conditioning to your existing reality? It's simple. So it's more than just a condition of this life when Uranus is operating. You understand the point? Uranus also connects for us to what we call, or what is euphemistically called, the higher mind. Now there's two components of this. One, in this way, it correlates with a large blueprint that your soul has in mind for your evolution. So when Uranus is active through transit, it begins to generate messages by way of right to left brain that are implicating your future to come. Your future. The problem in the circuitry, right to left brain, the messages cannot be linear. It'd be great if it was monopoly directions, then we feel secure. But they're not. It's the famous Uranian snapshot, like this. And this creates its own confusion, because it's not linear. So typically the person's reaction, is this right, is it wrong, is it delusion, is it inspiration, should I act, not act? The real practical way for all you girls to handle this information, that is to know which is accurate and which is not, is that when Uranus is active, to simply inwardly pay attention, monitor in an objective way the element of repetition in the messages, no matter how radical they may seem. The ones that keep coming back won't go away, no matter how incomplete they may seem. It is the element of repetitiveness when Uranus is operative that will reflect the next 3 to 5 years of your existence. That which is appearing 1 to 2 times / infrequently will either be delusion or information that will be relevant in your life 10 to 15 years from now. Not now. Uranus via higher mind also has an ultimate connection to the biggest brain of all that we like to call God. The medium of the creative projection we call creation. The way it was actually projected to what we call true time-space. The medium is electrical. Most of us will agree that the very essence of the human brain, and in fact the organism, is electrical. So in effect we have the interfacing computer language between big computer, small computer. Right? So the bottom line super state of activity, so to speak, trying to seed its total creation, seed its total creation with new thought impulse that reflect the evolutionary requirement throughout the creation, not this birth. And because we have these little brains here, they receive, pick up, reflect these thought impulses. And like Friday night, we make the question, the survey, how many of us in the room is an empirical experience having this effect of finding thoughts in our brain that seem to come from who knows where. This is a proving of this point. And this is now reflecting the larger future of the collective, not just the individual. And this is why more and more people begin to have premonition/vision of collective future events. These are meant to occur in increasing numbers within human brains. Why? As potential warning/caution signs. You know, when Nostradamus made all his quatrain thing, Pluto was transit to Sagittarius. 1995, it is that. Now, is this a mini history repeating itself? The intention of Nostradamus in offering his quatrains was in the hope that in so doing, the events predicted would never occur. So in a very similar way, human brain is being seated. Some have these now visions and premonitions, the intention of which hopefully is that they will never occur by adjusting what is occurring on the planet. Does that make sense?
Yes.
This is why, again, so many people are having this tremendous disruption in their sleep patterns. My advice there for those that are experiencing this, just go with it. You're only going to feel tired when you maintain the thought form, somebody told me I had to sleep from 8 to 5. That's a conditioning pattern. And if you think you must sleep when your body or soul does not, yeah, you'll get tired because you think it. Let yourself just go with it. If you harmonize yourself with uranium vibration, there's no such thing as being tired. At least not on a brain level. This might get tired. Any questions on these points?
How does one computer to the other computer then mess up electricity? How does one small computer to another small computer and a big computer mess up?
It doesn't have to. It only messes up when there's resistance. If you have a buildup of resistance in electrical wire, what happens? So the clear issue is to remove the resistance. But again, for most of us, this can be scary stuff, yes? Who's taught us to think this way? What are the existing conditioning patterns that allow us to embrace and understand these things? You're going to find it in some public textbook. You're going to find it on a library shelf. You're going to find some current college professor talking in these terms. You're going to find the president of the U.S. talking this way. You're going to find the Pope talking this way. You see my point?
It comes to me that it is some kind of a knowing that this mind cannot know. that is the realization, and then it ceases to be the seat of knowing in our consciousness.
And another way to restructure your thought there, as at this current time it may not be able to know, but it could know, and could be open to this. Now, Uranus, anatomically, correlates with the brain, the synapse structure within it, the quality and integrity of the brain cells, the nature and quality of the thought within it. It correlates specifically to the lining of the lungs. That's why we were given that remedy yesterday. This is why the TB thing can be so dangerous. It correlates with the involuntary nervous system. It has a co-relative to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is a very misunderstood gland in the human body. It emits what are called chemical messages that impact on initially the primary brain, which in turn impacts on the pituitary, which in turn impacts on the pineal, which in turn re-impacts on the hypothalamus. You have a natural pyramid. When all this energy is revolving, it comes down to the parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous systems, which are also ruled by Uranus. This in turn correlates with the regulation of the circulatory system. On a chakra system level, for those into chakra, the Uranus has a specific correlation to the middle layer of the root chakra. The root chakra has 3 rula, Saturn, Uranus, Pluto. Now think of the symbolism. We can now equate Saturn with the crust of the Earth. We can equate Uranus with fault lines in this crust. And we can equate Pluto with Kundalini. Get the point. Which is the physiological substance in the human body responsible for the evolution of the entire organism.
Yeah, is this work not only with the chakras, but also with the spine, the spinal cords?
Yeah.
3 layers of the spinal cord.
Right. So the point is that when Pluto is active, which is the individual and collective soul, there's a simultaneous stimulation of Kundalini in the human organism. This substance is actually secreted. There's an actual gland in the body. You know, how many have studied anatomy and physiology? How many are familiar with Gray's Anatomy? You know that in this book, everything is named and classified except this one little gland on the inside of the last vertebra on the spine. Everything. They draw the picture, no name. But for thousands of years, this was considered in the East to be called the Kundalini gland. That actually emits a physiological substance. And when this substance is active, it correlates with evolution. The action of Kundalini is metamorphic, which is a famous example of the caterpillar cocoon butterfly. This is metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is different than transformation. Yes?
What occurs when there's chemotherapy?
It depends on each person. There's no absolute answer. Yes?
Could you say a little more about the difference between metamorphosis and transformation?
Metamorphosis is caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly / mutation. Transformation is a growth through time, one stage leading to the next. Metamorphosis is like this. Transformation is, oh, Yes. Whereas Neptune is transcendence. So now, you can imagine in this root chakra analogy, Saturn, Uranus, Pluto, that will now, when Pluto is active, it's not just your soul. I mean, think of it. Pluto has a direct connection to the genetic structure of life. Genetic structure dictates body type. Genetic structure dictates appearance. And so on and so forth. Everything that you are is dictated in your genetics. So the question becomes, why the soul in any given life has its own evolutionary intentions. A type and quality of life that dictates a certain kind of experience in order to foster the evolutionary equation. It also connects to the body type that the soul utilizes to do so. Clearly the experience of a dwarf and their experience of reality is going to be quite different than Adonis. Yes? In all possible combinations. So, when you have Pluto active, because this, what I'm saying here is the soul picks the body. It picks the genetics. When you're dealing with people with genetic damage, you will always find an afflicted Pluto. It doesn't mean when you find afflicted Pluto, you have automatic genetic damage. So when Pluto is active, it is simultaneously triggering Kundalini relative to metamorphosizing genetics. You understand the point? We're going to bring it back to the analogy of the hologram in the brain. When Kundalini is fully awakened in consciousness, there is a saying from the East that reflects this reality. It is called center everywhere, circumference nowhere. This is a holographic consciousness.
That's I see all, I am nothing in a certain way.
Another way of saying it now. So when Pluto is active, Kundalini is active, and it comes through the fault lines of the anus and the root chakra, which then in turn change the crust of the earth, meaning the structure of your reality. You sit down. So the question is, where is Pluto transiting in your chart? What is your current soul intention? How are the intentions implied in the birth chart currently evolving? What is the leading edge here? What is the reference to the natal Pluto? If you have a Pluto transit on your third house cusp, would it be illogical to conclude that all of your existing mental equations and opinions of all sorts are blown up? Yes? That you're going through a deep metamorphosis in your mental equations. Would it be illogical to conclude that you might find yourself suddenly in a confrontive psychology of anybody else's mental opinions and equations? You see the point? Now Pluto obviously has a collective implication. So the question becomes, how is it, why is it, in God's great mercy, that that somehow Pluto is only allowed to be in Scorpio 15 to 12 to 15 years? versus, say, Pluto and Taurus, which is there for almost eternity. Why is this? And why is it that when Pluto is in Scorpio, it is simultaneously within the orbit of Neptune? Why is this? What is the symbolic implication here?
Yeah, little Pluto goes on.
True. We can only take so much intensity. That's all. If you simply examine, again, for those that want to be well-rounded astrologers, I'm sure Well and Christian both agree, you must embrace many other disciplines. You can't just focus and limit your reading to stupid astrology. You cannot. And you have to be able to embrace history. And you have to read it. And I'm talking more than just facts and dates and memorizing. And if you truly begin to grasp, as Noel's trained himself, to watch for the psychology behind the stated news event, you see my point here, looking more deeply. And if you simply study history, from the point of view of understanding what's occurred when these cycles have happened before, it can be incredibly informative. As an example, the very last time Neptune and Uranus transit to the capital point together was in the 1820s. Most of us will remember that this correlated with the gestation of the Industrial Revolution in the Western world. And for those that have studied history, what happened to society relative to the gestation of the Industrial Revolution? What happened to many craftspeople, as an example?
There was a movement from the farms to the...
That's exactly right.
It broke up those family generations.
This is right.
We're in another phase.
And then you had child labor problems. And you began to have pollution of cities. You began to have people living in condensed situations that they were not used to. You had all the job displacement all over again.
And we're in another phase of that now. All this is being brought down.
Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
You know what Democrats in the U.S. were called in the 1820s? Republican Democrats. Sound familiar? And the point is a tremendous radical restructuring of reality. Not just the obvious industrial revolution, oh, I see a factory here. But what occurred because of the stupid factory. You see my point? In fact, in that time, in the U.S., Monroe Doctrine came out. And now what do we see relative to NAFTA? Before this, we had Reagan when he was telling us the Sandinistas were going to be in Texas in 3 days. Remember this one? And all the justification for that bullshit. These are examples of history paralleling. When Pluto was in Scorpio in this country last, you know what the biggest issue of the day was? Creating laws in which black people could not marry white people. That was the biggest issue. And what you're looking at is the theme of psychological polarization. You're looking at the delusion of maintaining the purity of races. Does it sound familiar today? So where is this Pluto thing transiting in your chart? What's it mean collectively to have this thing in Scorpio? Is it not a clear symbolism, i.e. Pluto in Scorpio? Because most of us have agreed that Scorpio is an archetype that we like to think of as free choice making. Yes? And since the polarity of Scorpio is Taurus, is it not fairly clear that the choices that the individual, thus the collective, is making are going to be implicating Taurus issues? Yes or no? The root of which is survival, and how we are going to survive. Yes? With Neptune's movement in Capricorn, is this not clearly the symbolism fitting this time, of the tremendous international linkage of all countries, all governments, all peoples on this planet? That the awareness and dependency, Cancer polarity, of this international linkage is the most radical revolution in human history. Yes or no? It has never occurred before. And what happens over here in Russia impacts what happens over here in the U.S. Yes?
Yes.
And so on and so forth, everywhere. So it's clear that the choices that are made within this phenomenal fact of international interrelatedness impacts everywhere. As an example, what if this clown in Russia, a dangerous clown, who has this neo-Hitler vision, somehow succeeds? What do you think the consequences are internationally? What do you think this would set in motion by way of expenditure of resources, decisions being made, the domino effect / consequences of those decisions based on one man? And you multiply this by millions, big and small. You understand the point? When you put into this mix the fact that Neptune correlates with what we call the collective conscience / unconscious, what does this mean to each of us as an individual? The collective conscious simply means the totality of psychological vibration existing at any moment in time. We all have Neptune here, little antenna. And we just unconsciously osmose this vibration. Understand my point? And when these things move through a Capricorn, relative to the transition of the ageless, relative to the breakdown of all the existing conditioning patterns. As an example, if you just narrow it to this country, the collective increasing despair, angst, depression, homelessness, permeation of drug, violence. And you have this as a collective vibration. And you all have your little Neptune thing going on, and you're picking up this vibration. Is it any wonder that you find yourself depressed and you don't know why? Is it any wonder you find yourself with sleep protein anxiety and you don't know where it's coming from? You understand the point? And so on. This is why it's most important relative to emotional psychological health that via Uranus, Neptune in Capricorn, one of the safest ways for you to sort out what is your own state of affair and what you are unconsciously osmosing is some sort of experiential, provable, practical, spiritual discipline so that you can create a detachment. Failing this, most people just get lost. In like the 1820s, relative to the philosophy of Schopenhauer, it's just the best of all worlds, Lord, I'll just get by. You understand?
We can move the hands of the clock up 17 minutes and you can stop. That's changing reality.
Any questions on these points?
Just one point that keeps coming up in my mind right now. I was thinking in the East, just generally, as a generalization, that desire is the cause of suffering. I mean, that concept, desire, and thinking of oneself, self-cherishing is the cause of
Desire
suffering.
is not the cause.
No, I know. I'm just saying that is the belief system. I was just suddenly real conscious of that belief system juxtaposed to that one grows through through suffering. And those two things are interesting to me, and I want something out of it, and I'm not sure what. There's like a gestalt out of that. We're talking about the Western world, which we're a part of, but this is a whole planet. And somewhere between those two things, there's some kind of something.
Well, I'll leave that with yourself.
Right.
That is part of your own realization
Yes.
process. Yeah?
It doesn't, that whole other way of thinking about the cause of suffering and as suffering as something to be free of is in the world at the same time as that other belief. So
Well, we should probably just make a distinction. Suffering in and of itself will always be part of the human experience. As Noel has pointed out over and over, crisis is necessary for growth. But the real issue is, do I define myself through the necessity of crisis as in a religious condition? And is that possibly different than just a normal experience of crisis on a more or less cyclic versus permanent basis? Yes, sir.
You had described the effects of channeling, and as it exists, I'm curious to see what your opinion would be about the current and more increasing phenomenon of people claiming UFO abduction.
I think, as in the channeling phenomenon, that there certainly are true experiences, and others that perhaps wish they had the experiences and therefore manufacture. After all, if you take a normal black couple that the most documented case, I forgot their names, but they're
Mixed couple.
They were mixed. They were mixed.
mixed couple.
White woman,
Yes.
Barney Hill.
Arnie Hill, Book Magazine.
Yes, and the bottom line of which, her ability to identify a planet within a galaxy that she couldn't possibly see with her physical eyes, had no awareness of telescopes and the rest of it, and can pick it out on the map. I mean, this to me seems to constitute proof. So I think there are legitimate cases, yes. And there's also, as in just human affairs, and there's also bullshit. Well.
I think that's I think it's also a case where there's a parallelism, I think, here with regard to the fact that people make up the fact that they were abused as children. Just as some people will create the fact that they think is a fact about them being abducted. And in our panel plan that three of us have at the end of the day, this will come up again. I would just like to alert us to remember this moment. We will bring that up later.
And what Noel's speaking of here in fancy psychological terms is called behavioral contagion, or collective contagion.
And that is the makings of history, just as you were pointing out. Individual consciousness is growing, if I'm reading you right, to then have many individuals in a collective, may affect history. And that's why these mundane aspects, the Urana's conjunction is not just an individual strife, but in the nations. situation, a whole lot of individuals. And when something happens there, the consequences last for 200, 400, 600 years. And that is Earth consciousness change, right?
That's it. Yes, I want to ask a question about the nodes, if I can. In the same sense that at the end of an age, you get the entire age coming to a head, and further coming to the end of Scorpio, we're getting some essence of that. The nodes, in essence, the question really is what is the relationship in that sense to nodes? Obviously, they go backwards, but it's relative to everything else, they go the other direction. Are they the removal of that, or are they the opposite?
The simplest way to understand the transiting for the North and South and North node individually or collectively, the archetype that really connects, given the fact that we still exist within the law of three, past, present, future, is that the South node, North node represent the dynamic tension between the past and the future as experienced in the moment. Most of us would agree that our life is in a situation of tension between the past, the present, experience, and the moment. This is demonstrated through this transit, South and North nodes. So with the shift now going to Taurus, South node, North node, Scorpio, given the fact in a little while here that transiting North node is going to be on top of Pluto. Now, one of Noel's examples yesterday was North Korea's chart having 28 Scorpio rising. So if we link it to mundane astrology, which is Noel's new specialty, what do you think a possible implication is in this symbolism? Maybe Noel can share with us more later about this.
Well, that would be a time for it could come out publicly.
But you have to look at the other end of the thing, which is a seventh house situation with towers there, and then the condition of Venus, and it's obviously an alert to the world for a new market position in world trade, because Japan is faltering in a recession, and China is rising in capitalism, and Korea wants to be part of the pie that is now being formulated in what's called the Asian basin. This is where the action is in business. And I'm sounding much more sophisticated than I am in this field of international commerce, but that has to be the readout. Interestingly, the Israeli PLO signing chart has a Scorpio Taurus horizon axis as well. That axis is coming up everywhere, just simply everywhere. And everywhere that's in the news, let's put it that way. That's what we're most aware of. And the rulers of it, Venus and Pluto, were in very harsh arrangement with one another. The plumbing problem of the PLO Israeli signing was larger than Roto-Rooter can manage. And this, we're seeing the sputtering as it's trying to get flush out. And the same thing is happening now in nations like North Korea, trying to take their stand and say, hey, here we are.
And another symbolism that this perfectly fits is the fact that because now this transit occurs in the U.S. chart at 12 and 6 hours, and if you take a look at this thing, is it not true that President Clinton has just been in Russia, has now made an agreement where the missiles are pointing not at each other's countries, but away? Pluto and Scorpio have something to do with atomic bombs. The 12th house has something to do with diffuse intention. The 6th house has something to do with undermining or relaxing crisis.
And the military service. And also, just as we were talking at breakfast, just to remind you, we Pluto in the ninth house. And then you see that Clinton has transited Pluto square his sun 3 times in 1994. And look how all are being affected for new perspectives. And the weakest link, of course, happens to be the American president. There's no doubt about that when you look at the 3 charts together.
And this is what I call the law of synchronicity.
The last,
The law of synchronicity.
Yes, very well.
So, the bottom line is, yeah, we have these collective applications, but we also have the individual. Where is it transiting south and north node in your chart? What is the dynamic tension between the past and the future registered in the moment occurring in your life? You put in the current planetary rulers. Venus is now in Capricorn. This is now the ruler of the current transiting south. Obviously, Pluto is the ruler of the north. Where are these 2 planets in your individual chart? How does this give you additional information relative to the past and the future registered in the moment? You see the point? In a way, we could call this the leading edge of your evolutionary development. It's where you are living most consciously this moment. And what is underneath this is a transit of Uranus and Neptune and Pluto. Pluto becomes ever more dominant in the individual and collective consciousness now that the North Node is getting ready to transition Scorpio. Think of it this way. In this way, Pluto, for the next 18 months, will be the dominant archetype that is defining the experience of Earth, individually and collectively. Thanks for coming this morning.